Alright, let's kick this project off. So let's get started. We're going to go in Unity projects. We're going to do new. And this is going to be a 3D project. And we'll go ahead and name this. And we're going to, besides 3D, we're going to use the Universal Render Pipeline, or also known as URP. Right, this is just a quick and easy way to create graphics across a range of platforms, all the way from mobile to PC. So it's very versatile and easy to use. We'll name our project, and you want to pay attention to where you are saving. Where is the location that you are saving your project? I commonly will use my documents rather than my desktop because I don't want to accidentally delete my whole project. There are ways to back it up, but just make sure you know where you're saving your project. Let's go ahead and create it. So don't be alarmed, it will take a few minutes of loading that. So by default we get the URP example sample scene set up. Don't be surprised if a few things go blue or change colors as it's loading. We can click the README just one time and it gives you some information to read about URP. There's the URP documentation, and this has a lot more information as well that you can read up on URP and see some of the features with that. We're going to close that out for now, and we're going to go to our scenes folder. So here is our sample scene. We're going to go ahead and create a new scene. So we'll go create, and then scene. We're going to name this for now level 01. We can always rename this later. So we've got level 01, and then we'll go ahead and double click to bring this up. And your default, you may be in the default layout, which is fine. Pretty simple, as you have your scene view and your game view. What I generally do is grab the game view tab and drag it to the right. That way you can space that out and you have two areas. And then we have our scene kind of set up. Next thing we want to do is make sure our Visual Studio is set up. So we're going to go to Edit and Preferences. We want to go on the side here to our external tools. And you want to make sure your external script editor is set to Visual Studio. Whichever version you have installed, you want to select that. Make sure that's set here so we're good to go. Here also in your colors, you can also change your play tint mode. So I currently have mine set to red. I could make it a little bit more of an orangish color. And so when we're in play mode, it will tint our screen. So also another little catchy trick here that you could use as well. We'll go ahead and close this out. Now to get started, we're going to create a simple play area. So to do that, we're going to create some primitives. We'll come over to our hierarchy, and we can just right click in this empty space here, and we're going to do 3D object, and we're going to start with a plane, and we'll go ahead and name this ground plane and hit enter. So we're just naming that in the inspector, and our transforms may or may not be funky, but whenever you create a new 3D object or you import a 3D object, we want to go ahead and reset the transforms. So on the transform rollout here, we're going to click the three dots and do reset. That'll put everything at the origin of the world, and that's how the scene is rendered. That's where the scene is rendered from, is the origin here. So now that we've got that, we'll go ahead and set our scale to maybe 5 by 5 by 5. And I only do that, right? Obviously a plane, it's not going to give it thickness, so the Y doesn't really change anything, but the X and Z is what's going to make it fill out. In our scene view, we have a couple things. If we ever want to turn off our lights, there's a light shortcut here to turn off the lights. We have the grid icon and the drop-down arrow for the settings. We can turn off our grid with the icon. We can click the drop-down arrow if we wanted to use a different axis. So there's a few settings there. We could change the opacity. Usually I like mine a little bit low, but where I can still see it. We have our gizmos and our drop-down arrow. So our gizmos will literally, you'll notice it's only hiding our camera and lights gizmos, but it literally hides every gizmo. Now, if we click the drop-down arrow, we can turn off specific things to not see certain gizmos, as well as we have our 3D icons that we could make these icons bigger or smaller. And that's just the icon representing where our light is and where our camera is. When we click our camera, this is what our camera is seeing. So I would go ahead and select your camera so you can actually see the direction that we are facing. You can kind of look at my navigation gizmo here where the Z is going this direction, the X bright red, and the Y is going up and down, and so that we can see what our camera's looking at. Because next, I'm going to go ahead and right click and create another 3D object. We'll do a sphere. We're going to name this player. We want to go ahead and click the 3 dots and do reset transforms. And the other thing that you can do is if you're zoomed out, you can actually select your player, hover your mouse inside of the scene view, and press F. F will zoom in, and there we have it. Now you'll notice that our ground plane is going right in between the center of our sphere. So if our player is 1, right, that means, right, 0.5 is on one side of the plane and 0.5 is on the other. So if we go to our position here and our Y, which goes up and down, I want it to be sitting on the ground. And so what I'm going to do is just type in 0.5. And that's because the ball itself, the sphere, is 1 unit. But with the gizmo, our pivot point is in the center, so it's halfway. So we'd want it 0.5 on our ground plane. So for our plane, we just typed in the numbers, but there are 3 ways to scale something. The shortcut or easiest way would just be pressing R, and here you can just drag the scale for the Z and the X. Sorry, the X and the Z. And the second way would be if we go over to our transform gizmo, we can actually drag on the coordinates, the axis. So on the X, I can drag this. And then on the Y, which doesn't do anything right now, and the Z, I can drag. So dragging there is kind of nice sometimes when you just need to drag it out. Now when we just know a whole number is going to work, we can, the third way is what we did, which is just typing in 5, and we're good to go. Now you'll notice our ground plane has a mesh collider on it, so it will collide with other things that have colliders. We're going to select our player, which has a sphere collider on it, so that way it'll also collide. But one of the things that we're going to want to do is we want it to have mass, and we want it to be affected by gravity. So we're going to go ahead and add a component, and it's going to be under physics, but we can also just type in to search for it, and that is going to be rigid body. So just the first one, rigid body, that's for 3D objects. And then we have the rigid body here, which we can give it mass, and it uses gravity now. So next up, if we go to our materials folder, we have our skybox material, but we also may want to have some materials here for our scene to make it look a little bit different. So what we can do is right click in our project window here, and we'll create and go to material. Now this material, I'm going to go ahead and call it go ahead and do one for player, and we can click on it, and then over on the right hand side you'll see that when it created this material, the shader is specifically a lit shader because this is for the URP renderer. So it's a lit shader, meaning it can be lit up with lights. Our workflow, metallic, which is pretty common. And so we're going to skip down to our surface inputs. Our base map color is white. Now right now you'll notice everything has kind of got this brownish tint to it, which will change here shortly. But for now, our player, we're going to change we got to make sure if you click the player, we got to go back to our materials, select the material. We're going to change the white to say a light blue, and you'll see that's on the player material now, but our player material is not assigned to the player. Now we could go ahead and right click and do rename. If it helps at all, you could name this, mat_player, so you know this is the material for the player, not to be confused that they are named the same thing. And now what we need to do is drag this over to the player. Now if we accidentally drag it onto the ground plane, you can just do Control-Z and then re-drag it back onto the player. Now the reason why we're getting a little bit slightly different color in the ground and all that, we select our lights. You'll notice our light color has got this cream color on the light in the inspector. So I'm going to change that maybe to more of a white. And so that gives us just a white light. So we can go back to our material. And inside of our material we have the metallicness, which we're going to leave set to 0. And for our player, if we want it to be shiny, we're going to put the smoothness to 0.75. Right, and that's going to make it shiny like a marble. Now if we were wanting a matte texture, we'll do that next. We'll go ahead and right click, create another material. We can call this material _ ground for now. And make this a darker gray maybe, and assign this to the floor. And you can see if we put it up to 1 with our light, depending on our camera angle, the ground is going to be shiny. But what we want to do is maybe put it at 0.25, and that's going to make it more of a matte color, so a non-shiny finish. Something to keep in mind for later on. Now, if we had an actual texture to put on the ground or on our player sphere here, you would have a texture file, and we'd drag that texture into this square right next to base map. So we can click the circle here, and there are sample maps in here that can be assigned. So let's say for our base map, I've got this default checker gray, and you can see if I kind of spin around, it just puts that default checkered look on it. Whoops. And if we don't want anything on there, we can just scroll to the top and select none. Because right now we don't have any textures. I can select my camera to see which way it's facing, because if we move it, there's our camera. Alright, so now we could add in a wall, and so what we're going to do is right click and go to 3D object in our hierarchy, right? You could also click the plus symbol and go to 3D, so there's a few ways to do it. And this time we're going to create a cube. Move this over here, and then I'll grab R for scale or rail. What I could do is set this to maybe 2, and then put the Y at 1. That will make it sit on the ground because it's half from the center point. And on the X I could put 0, and the Z I could put 0. So that way it's just kind of reset. Should have done reset transforms first, but that's okay. We'll move this maybe kind of where it's in the camera view. And I'm going to press E for rail or scale. And I'm going to grab the blue axis here with the scale tool and just scale this out. And now what we can do is take a look at our thickness real quick. Maybe this could be a wood fence later on. So our scale for the kind of thickness of this is going to be the red, the X. We can kind of look here that maybe 0.5, whoops, 0.5 is good. And you can see our box collider actually is the green lines here. If I hide my mesh renderer, you can see that our box collider has lined up with this, so the player will be able to collide with this wall. And later on we'll go over how do we get like some cool fence geometry and replace this box wall with that. So for right now we'll just name this wall, and there we go, and that's set up. So now what we want to do is in our assets, we'll go back to our assets, we're going to right click and we're going to create a folder, and I'm going to call this prefabs. And for now we'll go ahead and drag in our ground plane, our player, our wall, so we're good to go. And we have prefabs of those that we can make changes later. I'm going to go ahead and make a few changes. Let's see. For our aspect ratio, we could go ahead and change this to 16:9, since that's the standard kind of PC monitor. So our camera will automatically snap to that. Whoops. And we'll leave that there. I think that is a good start. So next we're going to get into having the player movement quickly, and get into some of the camera setup and some of the mechanics and gameplay that we're going to have in the game.